What if Sleeping Beauty wasn't just a bedtime story, a charming, innocent narrative spun to lull children to sleep? What if, instead, it was a veiled echo of a buried ritual from the ancient world? A memory of profound transformations, of sacred sleeps and mystical awakenings. You think you know this fairy tale? The royal curse, the fateful prick, the century of profound slumber, and the heroic kiss. But beneath this comforting surface lies a deeper, more enigmatic narrative of ancient origins and hidden meanings, waiting for you to unearth its secrets. Imagine a time when stories were not mere entertainment, but vessels of sacred knowledge, encoding the deepest truths about fate, sleep, death, and rebirth. This tale, passed down through countless generations, has shed its skin, but its primordial essence still pulses beneath modern adaptations. Prepare to awaken to a secret nearly 4 millennia in the making, a truth sleeping in plain sight. Let's begin with the narrative you hold in your mind, the version of Sleeping Beauty, most commonly shared, propagated by Charles Perrault's 17th century rendition, the Brothers Grimm's 19th century collection, and, perhaps most indelibly, Walt Disney's animated classic. You picture a beautiful princess, joyously celebrated at her christening, but this jubilation is swiftly overshadowed by the arrival of a slighted, malevolent fairy or witch. In a fit of vengeful rage, she casts a dire prophecy upon the infant, that before her 16th or 18th year, she will prick her finger on a spindle and fall into a death-like sleep, from which only a king's son can awaken her. Despite her father, the king's, desperate efforts to eradicate every spinning wheel in the kingdom, destroying them in fiery pyres, fate, as it always does in these tales, finds a way. The prophecy is tragically fulfilled. On the fateful day, the curious princess discovers a hidden spinning wheel in a forgotten tower, pricks her finger, and plunges into a profound, enchanted slumber. To protect her, a good fairy casts a spell upon the entire castle, causing everyone within its walls, from the courtiers to the stable animal stow, fall into a sleep alongside her, ensuring she won't awaken alone in a foreign world. Concurrently, a formidable hedge of thorny briars, impenetrable and dense, grows up around the domain, concealing it entirely from the outside world for 100 years. As decades turn into a century, kingdoms rise and fall outside its enchanted perimeter, and the legend of the sleeping princess becomes a distant, forgotten whisper. Finally, a brave and curious prince, drawn by the faint echoes of this ancient legend, hacks his way through the seemingly impenetrable thicket, battling the entangling vines and thorns. He discovers the silent, perfectly preserved sleeping princess, is instantly captivated by her ethereal beauty, and with a single, pure kiss upon her lips, breaks the century-long spell, awakening her and the entire castle with her. They marry, often implying a joyous, happily ever after, a triumphant conclusion of good over evil. This is the narrative we embrace, the comforting bedtime story. Yet, pause for a moment and consider its recurring motifs. The curse, seemingly arbitrary in its ferocity, disproportionate to the insult. The spinning wheel, an antiquated, almost innocuous object that holds such devastating, life-altering power. The 100-year sleep, a duration so vast it beggars belief for a simple enchantment, effectively making her a stranger in a new world. And the awakening kiss, a tender gesture that holds the power to shatter a century of magic, transcending time itself. Do these elements truly make sense in a literal context? Or are they, as often happens in ancient tales, deeply symbolic, not arbitrary additions to the narrative, but carefully chosen vessels for a profound, hidden meaning that speaks to archetypal human experiences? We are taught to take them at face value, to simply accept the magic, but their very strangeness whispers of something more, something older. These tropes are the surface ripples of a much deeper current, leading back to sources far more primal, far more mystical than a simple cautionary tale or a romantic fantasy. They are the keys to unlocking a timeless archetype, a forgotten language of the soul, To truly grasp the ancient echoes of Sleeping Beauty, you must journey back, far beyond the European courts of Perrault and Grimm, beyond the medieval bards and troubadours, into the swirling sands of ancient Egypt, nearly 900 years ago. Here, within the fragments of papyrus from the New Kingdom, around 1900 BCE, scholars have identified the story of the doomed prince, a narrative that, while not a direct Sleeping Beauty tale, embodies the fundamental structural and thematic elements of what would become a universal archetype. In this remarkably preserved text, a prince is born under a dire prophecy pronounced by the seven Hathors, goddesses of destiny, love, and fate, akin to the fairies at the princess's christening. They declare that he is fated to die by a crocodile, a snake, or a dog. His father, the pharaoh, in a desperate attempt to defy this inescapable doom, constructs a secluded palace high in the desert, isolating his son from the dangerous world below. This act of sequestering the prince within a hidden guarded domain is a direct parallel to the princess's century of enchanted female isolation behind impenetrable briar walls. Despite this meticulous seclusion, destiny cannot be evaded. The prince eventually leaves his isolated sanctuary, travels to a foreign land, and ultimately confronts his fated perils, though the papyrus fragment breaks off before a definitive resolution of his death. This ancient Egyptian tale highlights key shared motifs: a pronouncement of inevitable fate at birth, often by mystical beings, a period of enforced stasis, isolation, or hiddenness designed to avert this fate, and an eventual, fated confrontation or awakening. The sleep-death motif, while not a literal slumber for the prince, manifests as a life lived under the shadow of preordained doom, a passive state of waiting for an inescapable fate to unfold, a symbolic suspension of truly free existence. The princess, like the prince, is under the dominion of a powerful, inescapable force that dictates her reality. These ancient texts, often preserved through meticulous archaeological findings and the painstaking work of epigraphers, reveal how fairy tales are not static inventions, but evolutions of far older mythic structures. The core idea of a life-altering prophecy, a period of imposed stasis or hiddenness, and a fated awakening or confrontation, is a narrative template that precedes written European history by millennia. The tales we know are merely the latest iterations of universal human experiences, archetypes passed down through incredibly resilient oral traditions, adapting to new cultures and languages, yet retaining their profound symbolic DNA. The Sleeping Beauty archetype, therefore, is not a European invention, but a global narrative deeply embedded in humanity's collective unconscious, a testament to the enduring power of these ancient mythic structures that speak to our deepest fears and hopes. It suggests that certain narrative patterns are so fundamental to the human condition that they spontaneously arise across disparate cultures, reflecting universal truths about destiny, transformation, and awakening. The enduring fascination with Sleeping Beauty stems not from its surface narrative, but from its deep symbolic resonance, speaking directly to the collective human psyche on an unconscious level. Let's unravel the intricate tapestry of hidden meanings woven into its very fabric, exploring how seemingly simple elements become conduits for profound truths. Consider, first, the spindle. This is far from a quaint, innocuous domestic tool. It is a profoundly charged symbol, with roots stretching back to ancient matriarchal societies. Across myriad cultures, the act of spinning and weaving is intrinsically linked to fate and destiny. The Greek moirai, the Roman parquet, the Norse nornsal, are divine weavers who spin the thread of human life, measure its length, and ultimately cut it. For the princess to prick her finger on this instrument of destiny is no accident. It is the fulfillment of a preordained decree, a tangible connection to her cosmic blueprint. Furthermore, the sharp spindle, piercing the finger and drawing blood, is a potent symbol of initiation most powerfully interpreted as the onset of puberty and menstruation. Her innocent blood, spilled by this instrument of fate, marks a dramatic and often perilous transition from innocent girlhood to womanhood. This passage was, in ancient cultures, fraught with both wonder and danger, signifying new responsibilities, new powers, and new vulnerabilities. It inextricably connects her to the grand, timeless narrative of the feminine life cycle, the thread of existence spun by forces beyond mortal control, a moment of profound, irreversible change. Next, we delve into the core of the tale, the long sleep. This isn't just a nap, it is a profound metaphor for death itself, a cessation of conscious life, a removal from the flow of linear time, a state of profound stillness. Yet, paradoxically, it is also a fertile period of transformation, a chrysalis state, where the old self dissolves and the new self awaits emergence. In Jungian psychology, this profound stasis embodies a descent into the unconscious, a symbolic journey into the underworld of the psyche. It is a necessary period of introspection, integration, and incubation before psychological rebirth can occur. The sleeping princess can be seen as the anima, the dormant feminine aspect within the collective psyche, waiting to be integrated and activated. This concept of symbolic death, followed by a powerful rebirth, is a cornerstone of countless ancient myths and spiritual traditions, from shamanic vision quests to mystery rites, where initiates undergo a symbolic dying to shed their old selves and emerge transformed. Finally, we arrive at the kiss, the seemingly simple act that shatters the century-long enchantment. This kiss is not merely romantic, it is a powerful act of resurrection, a transference of life, force, of breath, of animating spirit. In mystical traditions, particularly those involving healing or awakening, the kiss can signify the infusion of divine essence, a sacred awakening. It's an initiation into a new state of being, much like the kiss of life given by a deity to a clay figure in creation myths. This is a powerful, almost alchemical, transformation, the infusion of external masculine energy, the prince, often a solar archetype representing consciousness and active principle, into the passive, receptive feminine principle, the princess, often a lunar or telluric archetype representing the unconscious and potential. The thorns that grow around the castle, an impenetrable barrier, symbolize the psychological defenses or life's obstacles that must be courageously navigated and overcome to reach this profound state of awakening or inner integration. Astrological associations further deepen this understanding. The concept of Venus, the planet of beauty, love, and feminine principle, undergoes periods of combustion or invisibility as it passes near the sun, only to re-emerge brilliantly mirroring the princess's disappearance into sleep and her radiant return. The cyclical nature of the lunar phases, with their periods of darkness, new moon, followed by rebirth and illumination, full moon, also resonates profoundly with the long sleep and awakening. The story, therefore, is not merely a narrative. It's a symbolic blueprint for the soul's journey, a coded message about how we, too, must confront our curses, endure periods of profound stasis and inner darkness, and ultimately await our own fated awakenings. It is a timeless narrative about becoming, about the hidden forces that shape our lives, and the transcendent power of conscious transformation. While the popular versions of Sleeping Beauty evoke imagery of gentle slumber and storybook romance, the earliest known literary version, Giambattista Basile's Sun, Moon, and Talia 1634, pulls back the curtain to reveal a narrative far more unsettling, more primal, and profoundly disturbing. It forces you to confront the raw, untamed power and perilous undertones that were inherent in these myths before their cultural refinement. This version, published as part of his collection, The Pentamerone, is a stark reminder that fairy tales were not always for children. In Basil's chilling tale, Talia, the Sleeping Beauty figure, falls into her deep, death-like sleep after a splinter of flax pricks her finger, a familiar setup. Her devastated father, unable to cope with her apparent death, places her in an abandoned, secluded palace. But here, the story takes a sharp and grotesque turn. A passing king, out on a hunting expedition, discovers the seemingly lifeless Talia. Overcome with an undeniable, base lust, he sexually assaults her while she is deeply unconscious. Having satisfied his desire, he then leaves her, still in her enchanted sleep, and returns to his own kingdom, presumably forgetting his transgression. Months later, miraculously, Talia, still in her profound slumber, gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, whom she names Sun and Moon. Her children are unknowingly conceived during her period of unconsciousness. One day, one of the infants, seeking nourishment, tries to suckle from Talia's finger and, in the process, accidentally draws the splinter from her flesh. This seemingly insignificant act awakens Talia to the horrifying reality of her situation. She is a mother, roused from a death sleep, by children conceived in a brutal act of violation, a grotesque mockery of true love. The king eventually remembers his encounter, returns to the palace, discovers the now awakened Talia and his children, and, strangely, falls deeply in love with her. However, his jealous queen, consumed by rage upon learning of his infidelity, plots a gruesome revenge. She attempts to have the twins butchered and cooked as a meal for the king, and later tries to burn Talia alive. The tale, in its conclusion, is as violent as its preceding events, with the villainous queen suffering a fiery death and Talia finally marrying the king. This is a profound, almost visceral, contrast to the sanitized narratives you are familiar with. Compare this raw, violent account to Grimm's Briar Rose, 1812, which, while still containing the 100-year sleep, sees the prince simply kiss the princess, and they awaken and marry, devoid of the sexual violence or infanticide plot. And then, of course, consider the Disney adaptation, which completely sanitizes any hint of peril beyond the curse itself, and a single, chaste, and entirely consensual kiss. This progressive sanitization from Basile to Grimm, and finally to Disney, is a profound example of cultural repression. As societies evolved, becoming more civilized and enlightened, and as fairy tales transitioned from adult oral traditions and courtly literature to stories primarily intended for children, the darker, more visceral, and often sexually charged elements were deemed inappropriate, too unsettling for polite society. The raw, often brutal realities of ancient myths, including themes of powerlessness, violation, and fierce vengeance, were systematically softened, smoothed over, and ultimately removed from the narrative to make them palatable. In particular, the tale's evolution reflects a deep societal discomfort with certain aspects of feminine power, especially when it appeared outside societal control, or when women were perceived as passive vessels subject to male actions. The older versions, while undeniably disturbing, retained a potent connection to a time when myths wrestled more directly with the dangerous and transgressive aspects of human nature and divine influence, before they were dressed up for a gentler, more innocent audience. They offer a window into a more complex, less comfortable understanding of human sexuality, power, and destiny. Why has this tale, Sleeping Beauty, resonated so deeply and persisted for nearly 40 years across diverse cultures, surviving countless transformations and repressions? Its enduring power lies in its profound ability to tap into universal fears and fascinations that transcend time and culture, speaking to the core of the human condition. It speaks, fundamentally, to the profound loss and awakening of self. The princess's sleep represents a suspension of identity, a period where her consciousness and agency are stripped away, and she exists solely in a state of suspended animation, isolated from the world. Her awakening is not merely physical, it is a spiritual and psychological return to consciousness and identity after a long, profound absence. This resonates deeply with the human experience of losing oneself in periods of trauma, depression, severe illness, or profound uncertainty, only to find a difficult but ultimately transformative path back to self-awareness and vitality. It symbolizes the necessary withdrawal from the world to undergo internal change. The story also grapples powerfully with the complex dynamics of feminine agency and restriction. In its earliest forms, particularly Basil's version, the princess is largely passive, a victim of circumstance, a pawn of fate, and sometimes directly of male desire. The curse itself can be seen as a metaphorical restriction placed upon feminine potential or freedom, a societal confinement of burgeoning female power. Yet, her eventual awakening, however it comes, is an undeniable reclaiming of self, an assertion of existence. The evolution of the tale, sanitizing the violent elements, might reflect a societal shift in how female figures are perceived and presented, moving from passive victims to more idealized, albeit still dependent, heroines, reflecting changing cultural anxieties around female sexuality and autonomy. And at its core, Sleeping Beauty explores the timeless human struggle against destiny. Can fate be avoided? The king's futile attempts to defy the prophecy, destroying all spinning wheels, underscore humanity's limited power against predetermined paths, and the inescapable nature of certain cosmic designs. Yet, the kiss, the fated encounter with the prince, suggests that destiny also holds the key to liberation and new beginnings. It reassures us that even when confronted with insurmountable challenges or preordained paths, there is a possibility for transformation and a fated, necessary awakening. The very concept of waiting 100 years implies that certain pivotal moments cannot be rushed. They unfold according to a grand, unseen timeline. Ultimately, these fairy tales are not just quaint stories for children. They are profound remnants of sacred knowledge, encoded myths that have survived millennia through oral tradition and adaptation. They are containers of ancient wisdom, spiritual blueprints, and psychological maps designed to guide humanity through the tumultuous cycles of life, death, and rebirth. They hint at a time when humans were intimately connected to the symbolic language of the cosmos, when every event, every transition, held a deeper, mystical significance. Sleeping Beauty, therefore, didn't just wake up in a storybook. She was resurrected from a myth nearly 40 years old, carrying within her the enduring essence of humanity's journey, a testament to the fact that the most potent stories are those that hold a mirror to our deepest truths. So, as you reflect on this beloved tale, now imbued with the weight of millennia, consider the profound depths it conceals. Perhaps we are all still asleep, in some way lulled by the mundane, blinded by the obvious, entangled in the briars of everyday distractions, waiting to be awakened by a truth long buried beneath the surface of our awareness. Are we not all, in some sense, princesses or princes trapped in a slumber, awaiting the kiss of recognition, the prick of insight that will shatter the enchantment and reveal a deeper reality? These fairy tales are not childish fantasies or mere diversions. They are powerful, encoded myths, sacred vessels of human experience and spiritual understanding, passed down from a primordial past. They whisper of ancient rites, of profound transformations, and of the enduring mystery of consciousness itself, serving as a mnemonic device for lessons our ancestors deemed vital for survival and spiritual growth. They are living archetypes, constantly reinterpreting themselves for each new generation. If you are compelled by the secrets hidden in plain sight, if you want to keep uncovering the lost meaning of ancient myths and exploring the enigmatic history behind the stories you thought you knew, then subscribe to our channel. Join us as we continue to seek the sacred in the seemingly mundane. The journey into the heart of lost lore has only just begun, and the greatest awakenings often come when you least expect them.